Hello, everyone. It's the old question on this show, Keen on America, how to make sense of this bewildering, frustrating, exciting country in the wake, particularly of the last election. A couple of years ago, we had the CNN journalist, who I rather like and admire, Jake Tapper, on the show, arguing in a piece of fiction that he thinks to make sense of America, we need to return to the 1970s. He had a thriller out a couple of years ago called All the Demons Are Here. But I wonder if Tapper's changed his mind on this. His latest book, which is a sensation, which he co-wrote with Alex Thompson, is Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. Tapper, I think, tells the truth about Biden. As the New York Times notes, it's a damning portrait of an enfeebled Biden protected by his inner circle. I would extend that, rather than his inner circle, protected by an elite, perhaps a coastal elite of Democrats unable or unwilling to come to terms with the fact that Biden was way, way past his shelf life date. My guest today, William Deresiewicz. Always get his last name wrong. It must be.
No, that was good. You got it.
Probably because I'm anti-Semitic. Has a new piece out called Post-Election, in which he addresses much of the rottenness of the American progressive establishment in 2025. Bill, congratulations on the piece.
Thank you.
Have you had a chance to look at this Tapper book, or have you read about Original Sin?
Yeah, I read that piece. I read the piece that's on the screen, and I've heard some people talking about it. Yeah, and I mean, as you said, it's not just his inner circle. I don't want to blame Tapper. I mean, Tapper did the work. But one immediate reaction to the debate debacle was, where have the journalists been? You know, for example, just to unfairly call one person out, but they're just so full of themselves. You know, the New Yorker, dripping with self-congratulations, especially in its centennial year, its boundless appetite for self-celebration. To quote something one of my students once said about Yale, they've got a guy named Evan Osnos, who's one of their regulars on their political podcast.
And he's been on the show, Evan. And in fact, I rather like his, I was going to say his husband, his father, Peter Osnos, who's a very heavy-hitting ex-publisher. But anyway, go on. And Evan's quite a nice guy, personally. I don't know what.
I'm sure he's a nice guy. But the fact is, he's not only a New Yorker journalist, but he wrote a book about Biden, which means that he's presumably, theoretically, well-sourced within Biden world. He didn't say anything. I mean, did he not know, or did he not say?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, let's not.
You just don't want to ask, right? You don't want to know. But you're a journalist, so you're supposed to know. You're supposed to ask.
So, I'm sure you're right on Osnos. I mean, he was on the show, but all journalists are progressives, or at least all the journalists at the Times and the New Yorker and the Atlantic. And there seemed to be, as Jake Tapper is suggesting in this new book, and he was part of the cover-up, there seemed to be a cover-up on the part of the entire professional American journalist establishment, high-end establishment, to ignore the fact that the guy running for president, or the president himself, clearly had no idea of what was going on around him.
Right.
It's just astonishing, isn't it? And I'm not. I mean, hindsight's always easy, of course, 2020 in retrospect, but it was obvious at the time. I made it clear whenever I spoke about Biden that here was a guy clearly way out of his depth, that he shouldn't have been president. Maybe he shouldn't have been president in the first place, but whatever you think about his ideas, he clearly was way beyond his shelf date a year or two into the presidency.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and it's one of the things I say in the post-election piece, but I'm certainly not the only person to say this. There was an at least tacit cover-up of Biden, of his condition, but the whole thing was a cover-up. meaning every major issue that the 24 election was about, crime, the border, woke excess, affordability, the whole strategy of not just the Democrats, but this media establishment that's aligned with them is to just pretend that it wasn't happening, to explain it away. And we can also throw in pandemic policy, right, which people were still thinking about, and all the missteps in pandemic policy. The strategy was effectively a cover-up. We're not going to talk about it, or we're going to gaslight you, or we're going to make excuses. So is it a surprise that people don't trust these establishment institutions anymore? I mean, I don't trust them anymore, and I want to trust them.
Were there journalists? I mean, there were a handful of journalists telling the truth about Biden. Progressives, people on the left rather than conservatives.
Ezra Klein started to talk about it. I remember that. So yes, there were a handful, but it wasn't enough. And I don't say this to take away from Ezra Klein what I just gave him with my right hand, take away with my left, but he was also the guy, as soon as the Kamala succession was affected, who was talking about how Kamala in recent months has been going from strength to strength and hasn't put a foot wrong, and isn't she fantastic? So all credit to him for telling the truth about Biden, but it seems to me that he immediately pivoted to, I mean, I'm sure he thought he was telling the truth about Harris, but I mean, I didn't believe that for 1 second.
Well, meanwhile, the lies about Harris, or the mythology of Harris, the false, I mean, all mythology, I guess, is false about Harris, are building again. Headline in Newsweek that Harris would beat Donald Trump if an election was held again. I mean, I would probably beat Harris. I would beat Trump if an election was held again. I can't even run for president. So anyone could beat Trump given the situation.
Well,
and then David Plouffe suggested that I think he's quoted in the Tapper book that Biden totally fucked us. But it suggests that somehow Harris was a coherent progressive candidate, which she wasn't.
She wasn't. First of all, I hadn't seen this poll that she would beat Trump. I mean, it's a meaningless poll because she's not.
You could beat him, Bill, and no one can even pronounce your last name.
Nobody could say what would actually happen if there were a real election. It's easy enough to have a hypothetical poll. People often look much better in these kinds of hypothetical polls where there's no actual election than they do when it's time for an election. I mean, I think everyone except maybe David Plouffe understands that Harris should never have been the candidate, not just after Biden dropped out way too late, but ever, right? I mean, the real problem with Biden running again is that he essentially saddled us with Harris instead of having a real primary campaign where we could have at least entertained the possibility of some competent people. There are lots of governors. I mean, I'm a little, and maybe we'll get to this, I'm a little skeptical that any normal Democratic politician is going to end up looking good. But at least we do have a whole bunch of what seem to be competent governors, so people with executive experience. And we never had a chance to entertain any of those people because this Democratic establishment that just keeps telling us who we're going to vote for, right? I mean, it's now 3 elections in a row. They forced Hillary on us. And then Biden, I'm not going to say they forced Biden on us, although, I mean, elements of it did. It probably was a good thing because, he won. And he may have been the only one who could have won. And then we get Harris. It's like, it's reductio ad absurdum. Like these candidates they keep handing us keep getting worse and worse.
But it's more than being worse. I mean, whatever one can say about Harris, she couldn't explain why she wanted to be president, which seems to me a disqualifier if you're running for president.
Correct.
The point, the broader point, which I think you bring out very well in the piece you write, and you and I are very much on the same page here, so I'm not going to criticize you in your post-election.
You can criticize me, Andrew. I love when
I know I can criticize you, and I will, but not in this particular area, is that these people are the establishment.
Yes.
They're protecting a globalized world. They're the coast. I mean, in some ways, certainly the Bannonite analysis is right. And it's not surprising that they're borrowing from Lenin and the left is borrowing from Edmund Burke.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the real problem. I mean, part of what I say in the piece is that it just seems, maybe this is too organicist, but there just seems to be an exhaustion that the liberal impulse that started, around the time I was born in 1964. And I cite the Dylan movie just because it's a picture of that time where you get a sense of the energy on the left, the dawning of all this exciting,
that movie, and we've done a show on that movie itself, was critical, I guess, in a way, of Dylan for not being political. So,
well, but even leaving that aside, I mean, just the reminder you get of what that time felt like, that seems in the movie relatively accurate. That this new youth culture, the rights revolution, the counterculture, a new kind of impulse of liberalism and progressivism that was very powerful and strong and carried us through the 60s and 70s, and then became the establishment and has just become completely exhausted now. So I just feel like it's just gotten to the end of its possibilities. It's gotten to the end of its life cycle, but also in a less sort of mystical way. And I think this is a structural problem that the Democrats have not been able to address for a long time, and I don't see how they're going to address. The party is now the party, as you just said, of the establishment, uneasily wedded to a mainly non-white, sort of working lower class, maybe somewhat middle class, right? So it's sort of this it's this kind of hybrid beast that the two halves of which don't really fit together, right? The educated upper middle class, the professional managerial class that you and I are part of, and then sort of the average, Black, Latino, female, white female voter who doesn't share the interests of that class. So what are you going to do about that? How's that going to work?
And the thing that you've always given a lot of thought to, and it certainly comes out in this piece, is the intolerance of the Democratic Party. But it's an intolerance, it's not a sort of, and I don't like this word, it's not the fascist intolerance of the MAGA movement or of Trump. It's a repressive intolerance. It's this idea that we're always right, and if you disagree with us, then there must be something wrong with you.
Yeah, right. It's this at this point completely unearned sense of moral superiority and intellectual superiority, which are not really very clearly distinguished in their mind, I think. And they just reek of it, and people hate it, and it's understandable that they hate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's Hillary in a word.
It's Hillary in a word. And again, I'm wary of treading on this kind of ground, but I do think there's an element of, obviously Trump and his whole camp is very masculinist in a very repulsive way, but there is also a way to be maternalist in a repulsive way. It's this kind of maternal control. I think of it as the shushy mom voice, where we're going to explain to you in a very, calm way why you should listen to us and why we're going to control every move you make. And it's this kind of fear. I mean, what my piece is really about is this sort of like quasi-Nietzschean argument for, energy and vitality that's lacking on the left. And I think it's lacking because the left fears it. It fears sort of the chaos of the life force. So it just kind of like wants to shackle it in all of these rules and bureaucracy and speech codes and consent codes. It just feels lifeless. And I think everybody feels that. Yeah,
and it's the inability to imagine you can be wrong. It's the moral greediness of some people, at least, who think of themselves on the left. Some people might be listening to this, Bill, thinking it's just these two old white guys who think of themselves as progressives, but are actually really conservative, and that all this idea of Nietzsche is itself chilling. That it's a kind of anti-feminism. Christopher Hitchens famously wrote a piece in Vanity Fair suggesting that women weren't as funny as men. Of course, it got him into trouble.
Well, that's bullshit. Look, I mean, give me a chance to at least. I mean, I plead guilty to being an older white man. Whether I'm progressive or not.
I mean, you can't argue with that one. But
I'm not arguing with it. I mean, but the whole point rests on this notion of positionality. Like, I'm an older white man, therefore I think this or I believe that, which I think is bullshit to begin with, because down the street there's another older white guy who believes the exact opposite from me. So what's the argument here? But leaving that aside, and whether I am or am not a progressive, okay? I mean, my ideal politician is Bernie Sanders, so I'll just leave it at that. The point is, I mean, one point is that feminism hasn't always been like this, you know? I mean, second wave feminism that, started sort of late 60s, and I was a little kid. I mean, there was a censorious aspect to it, but there was also this tremendous vitality. I mean, I think of somebody like Andrea Dworkin, like, this is like, fuck you feminism. This is like, I'm not only not going to shave my legs, I'm not going to shave my armpits, and I don't give a shit what you think. And then sort of the next generation, when I was a young man, was like the Mary Gateskill sex positive power feminism, which had a different kind of vitality. Okay? So I don't think feminism has to be the feminism of the women's studies departments and of Hillary Clinton and of you can't say this and if you want to have sex with me, you have to follow these 10 rules. I don't think anybody likes this. I don't think women like it.
They're deplorable.
Yes. Like I said, I don't just think that the enemies don't like it, and I don't really care what they think. I think the people on our side don't like it. Nobody is having fun on our side. It's boring. No one's having sex, from what they tell me. The young. It's like it just feels dead. And I think when there's no vitality, you also have no creative vitality. And I think the intellectual cul-de-sac that the left seems to be stuck in, where there are no new ideas, is related to that.
Yeah, and I think the more I think about it, I think you're right. It's a generational war, but all the action seems to be coming from old people, whether it's the Pelosi's and the Bidens, or it's people like Richard Reeves making a fortune off books about worrying about young men, or Jonathan Haidt writing about the anxious generation. Where are, to quote David Bowie, the young Americans? Why aren't they? I mean, Bill, you're in a way guilty of this. You made your name with your book, Excellent Sheep, about the miseducation.
Yeah. So what am I guilty of exactly?
What?
I'm not sure how that makes me guilty, except that I'm pointing to a problem.
Well, I'm not saying you're all, but aren't you and Reeves and Haidt, you're all involved in this weird kind of generational war?
Okay, let's pump the brakes here for a second. Look, where the young people are, I mean, obviously most people, even young people today, even still vote for Democrats. But the young people who seem to be, exploring new things and who have energy and excitement are on the right. And there was a piece, and I'm going to forget the name of the piece or the author. Daniel Oppenheimer had her on the podcast. I think it appeared in The Point. A young woman, fairly recent college graduate, went to a convention of like young Republic, I don't know what they call themselves, and also to Democrats or liberals in quick succession, and wrote a really good piece about it. I don't think she'd ever written anything before or published anything before, but it got a lot of attention because she talked about the youthful vitality at this conservative gathering. And then she goes to the liberals, and they're all gray-haired men like us. Yeah. The one person who had anything interesting to say was Francis Fukuyama, who's in his 80s. And so she's making the point. This is the point. It's not a generational war, because there are young people on the right side of the spectrum who are doing interesting things. I mean, I don't like what they're doing because I'm not a rightist, but they're interesting, they're different, they're new, there's excitement there, there's creativity there.
But could one argue, Bill, that all these labels are meaningless and that whatever they're doing, I'm sure they're having more sex than young progressives, they're having more fun, they're able to make jokes, they're able, for better or worse, change the system. Yeah. Does it really matter whether they claim to be MAGA people or leftists? They're the ones who are driving change in the country.
Yes, they're the ones who are driving change in the country. The countercultural energy that was on the left in the 60s and 70s is now on the right. And it does matter because, they are operating in the political sphere, have an effect in the political sphere, and they are unmistakably on the right. I mean, there are all these new weird species on the right. The trad casts and sort of the neo-pagans and the alt-right and they're sort of like anti-capitalist conservatives, or at least anti-corporate conservatives, and all kinds of things that you would never have imagined. 5 years ago. And again, it's not that I like these things. It's that they're new. There's ferment there. So stuff is coming out that is already driving the culture and therefore the politics forward. And as somebody who, yes, is progressive, it is endlessly frustrating to me that we have lost this kind of initiative, momentum, energy, creativity to what used to be the stodgy old right. Now we're the stodgy old left.
But what do you want to go
we
back
get that
to?
back?
I mean, you brought up Dylan earlier. Do you just want to resurrect? I mean,
no, I don't.
Still around. You know, another one who comes to mind, who is another sort of bundle of contradictions, is Bruce Springsteen. He recently talked about the corrupt, incompetent, and treasonous nature of Trump. I mean, Springsteen's a billionaire. He even acknowledged that he mythologized his own working class status. He's never spent more than an hour in a factory. He's never had a job. So aren't all the pigeons coming back to roost here? The fraud of men like Springsteen are merely being exposed, and young people recognize them.
Well, I don't know about Springsteen in particular, and also
well, he's a big deal.
No, I know he's a big deal, and I love Springsteen. I listened to him on repeat when I was young, and I actually didn't know that he's never worked in a factory, and I quite frankly don't care, because he's an artist and he made great art out of those experiences, whether they were his or not. But to address the real issue here, he's an old guy. It sounds like he's just peddling the same. I mean, I'm sure he's sincere about it, and I would agree with him about Trump. But to have people like Springsteen or Robert De Niro or George Clooney.
Yeah, De Niro's no.
Okay, yes, it's all to the point that these are old guys. So you ask me, do I want to go back? The whole point is I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. I'm not going to be the one to bring us forward because I'm older. And also, I don't think I was ever that kind of creative spirit. But I want to know why there isn't sort of youthful creativity, given the fact that most young people do still vote for Democrats, but there's no youthful creativity on the left. So is it just that I want to be surprised is the point. I'm not calling for X, Y, or Z. I'm saying astonish me, right? Like Diaghilev said to Cocteau. Astonish me the way you did in the 60s and 70s. Show me something new. And I worry that it simply isn't possible on the left now, precisely because it's so locked down in this kind of establishment censorious mode that there's no room. There's no room for a new idea to come from anywhere.
As it happens, you published this essay in Salmagundi, and then a product, if not even be pre-counterculture. How many years old is this?
I think he started in 1964.
Yeah. So, but alongside your piece is an interesting piece from Adam Phillips about influence and anxiety, and he quotes Montaigne from On Experience, and Montaigne wrote, "There is always room for a successor, even for ourselves, and a different way to proceed." Is the problem, Bill, that we're not willing to leave the stage? I mean, Nancy Pelosi is a good example of this. Biden's a good example. In this Salmundi piece, there's an essay from Martin Jay, who's 81 years old. I was a grad student in Berkeley in the 80s. Even at that point, he seemed old. Why are these people not able to leave the stage?
Look, I am not going to necessarily sign on to that argument. And not just because I'm getting older. Biden...
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 61. So you mentioned Pelosi. I would have been happy for Pelosi to remain in her position for as long as she wanted, because she was effective. It's not about how old you are. Although it can be, obviously as you get older, you can become less effective, like Joe Biden. I think there's room for the old and the young all together if the old are saying valuable things and if the young are saying valuable things. It's not like there's a shortage of young voices on the left now. They're just not interesting voices. I mean, the one that comes immediately to mind that I'm more interested in is Richie Torres, right? Who's this congressman who's a genuinely working class black congressman from the Bronx, unlike AOC, who grew up the daughter of an architect in northern Westchester and went to a fancy private university, Boston University. So Richie Torres is not a doctrinaire leftist Democrat, and I always and he also seems to speak from a real, like from a real self. You know what I'm saying? Like he isn't just talking boilerplate. I just feel like there isn't a lot of room for the Richie Torres. I think the system that produces Democratic candidates militates against people like Richie Torres, and that's what I'm talking about.
In the essay, you write about Andy Mills, who was one of the pioneers of the New York podcast. He got thrown out of the New York Times for various offenses. Is one of the problems with the left is that they've, rather like the Stalinists in the 1930s, they've, excuse me, purged all the energy out of themselves. That anyone who had any ideas of any originality has been thrown out for one reason or another.
Well, because it's always the same reason, because they violate the code. I mean, yes, this is one of the main problems. And to go back to where we started with the journalists, I mean, it seems like the rationale for the cover-up, all the cover-ups, was, you know, we can't say anything bad about our side. We can't point out any of the flaws because that's going to help the bad guys. So, and if anybody breaks ranks, you know, we're going to cancel them. We're going to purge them. And I mean, any idiot understands that that's a very short-term strategy, right? I mean, you need the possibility of self-criticism and self-difference. I mean, that's the thing, you know, you asked me about old people leaving the stage, but the quotation from Montaigne said, there's always room for a successor, even ourselves. Okay, so this is about the possibility of continuous self-reinvention. Whatever you want to say about Dylan, some people like him, some people don't. He's done that. Bowie's done that. You know, this was sort of our idea. Like you're constantly, but this is what we don't have.
Yeah, I read the quote the wrong way, that we need to reinvent ourselves, but you only want to reinvent yourself. Bowie is a very good example. If one acknowledges, and Dylan, of course, one's own fundamental plasticity. And that's another problem with the progressive movement, is they don't think of the human condition as a plastic one.
That's interesting. I mean, in one respect, I think they think of it as too plastic, right? This is sort of the blank slate fallacy that, you know, we can make, there's no such thing as human nature and we can reshape it as we wish. But at the same time, they've created a situation, and this really is what Excellent Sheep is about, where they're turning out the same human product over and over and over again.
But in that sense, then, the Excellent Sheep you write about at Yale, they've all ended up now as neoconservatives. So they're just rebelling. I mean, it comes back.
No, they haven't. No, they are the backbone of this soggy liberal progressive establishment, right? A lot of them are. I mean, why is, you know, even Wall Street and Silicon Valley are sort of by preference liberal. I don't know what they're doing right now, because they're full of these kinds of elite college graduates who are, you know, been trained to be liberal.
So what are we to make of the Musk Thiel, particularly the Musk phenomenon? I mean, certainly Thiel, very much influenced by Rand, who herself, of course, was about as deeply Nietzschean as you can get. Why isn't Thiel and Musk just a model of the virility, the vitality of the early 21st century? You might not like what they say, but they're full of vitality, aren't they?
It's interesting. There's a place in my piece where I say that the liberal can't accept the idea that a bad person can do great things. And one of my examples was Elon Musk. And
the other one was Zuckerberg.
But Musk is not in the piece, because I wrote the piece before I wrote the piece before the inauguration, and he asked me to change it because of what Musk was doing. And even I was beginning to get a little queasy, just because the association with Musk is now different. It's now Doge. But Musk, who I've always hated, I've never liked the guy, even when liberals loved him for making electric cars. He is an example, at least the pre-Doge Musk. He's an example of a horrible human being with incredible vitality who's done great things, whether you like it or not. And I mean, this is the energy that I want to harness for our team.
I mostly agreed with your piece, but I didn't agree with that because I think that most progressives believe that actually the Zuckerbergs and the Musks, by being so successful, by becoming multi-billionaires, are morally a bit dodgy. I mean, I don't know where.
Yes, they do. That's exactly the point. But I think what they do is when they don't like somebody, they just negate the idea that they're great. They just, well, he's just, he's not really doing anything that great. You disagree with me.
So what about ideas, Bill? Where is there room to rebuild the left? I take your points, and I don't think many people would actually disagree with you. Where does the left, if there's such a term anymore, need to go out on a limb, break some eggs, offend some people, but nonetheless rebuild itself? It's not going back to Bernie Sanders and some sort of nostalgic New Deal.
No, I agree. So this may be unsatisfying, but this is what I'm saying. If there were specific new ideas that I thought the left should embrace, I would have said so. What I'm saying is the left needs, to begin with, to create the conditions from which new ideas can come. So, I mean, we've been talking about a lot of it. The censoriousness needs to go. I would also say, actually, I talk about this also, maybe you would consider yourself part of it. I don't know. There's this whole sort of heterodox realm of people who did dare to violate the progressive pieties and say, maybe the pandemic response isn't going so well. Maybe the Black Lives Matter protests did have a lot of violence. Maybe all the things, right? And they were all driven out, from 2020 and so forth. A lot of them were people who started on the left and would even still describe themselves as liberal, would never vote for a Republican. So these people are out there. They just don't have a voice within the Democratic camp because the orthodoxy continues to be enforced. So that's what I'm saying. You got to start with the structural conditions. And one of them may be that we need to get, I don't even know that these institutions can reform themselves, whether it's the Times or the New Yorker or the Ivy League. And it may be that we need to build new institutions, which is also something that's happening. I mean, it's something that's happening in the realm of, publishing and journalism on Substack. But again, they're still marginalized because that liberal establishment it's not that old people don't want to give up power. It's that the established people don't want to give up power, right? I mean, Harris is, she's like my age. So the establishment, as embodied by the Times, the New Yorker, the Ivy League, the foundations, the think tanks, the Democratic Party establishment, they don't want to move aside. But it's so obviously clear at this point that they are not the solution. They're not the solution.
What about the so-called resistance? I mean, a lot of people were deeply disappointed by the response of law firms, maybe even universities. The Democratic Party, as we noted, is pretty much irrelevant. Is it possible for the left to rebuild itself by a kind of self-sacrifice, by lawyers to say, well, I don't care what you think of me, I'm simply against you, and to work together, or university presidents who will take massive pay cuts and take on MAGA Trump world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is going to be the solution to the left rebuilding itself, but I think it has to happen, not just because it has to happen for, policy reasons, but I mean, you need to start by finding your courage again. I'm not going to say your testicles because that's gendered, but you need to start. I mean, why? The law firms, maybe that's a little, people have said, well, it's different because they're in a competitive business with each other. But why did the university, I'm a Columbia alumnus. I could not believe that Columbia immediately caved. Why did they do that? I mean, obviously they were, they weren't expecting this kind of a, really aggressive assault. But it occurs to me as we're talking that these are people, university presidents, who have learned cowardice. This is how they got to be where they got and how they keep their jobs. They've learned to yield in the face of the demands of students, the demands of alumni, the demands of donors, maybe the demands of faculty. They don't know how to be courageous anymore. And as much as I have lots of reasons, including personal ones, to hate Harvard University, good for them. Somebody finally stood up, and I was really glad to see that. So yeah, I think this would be one good way to start.
Courage, in other words, is the beginning, Bill.
Courage is the beginning, and
but
courage
not a courage that takes itself too seriously.
I mean, you know, sure. I mean, I don't really care how seriously.
Not a self-referential courage.
Real courage, which means you're really risking losing something. That's what it means.
And how can you and I then manifest this courage?
You know, you made me listen to Jocelyn Benson. I'm going to bill you for the time.
Oh yeah, I forgot. And I actually, I have to admit, I saw that on the email, and then I forgot who Jocelyn Benson is, which probably reflects the fact that she didn't say very much.
For those who don't know what we're talking about, she's the Secretary of State of Michigan. She's running for governor.
And she was absolutely diabolical. She was on the show, I thought.
She wrote a book called Purposeful Warrior, and the whole interview was just this salad of cliches: purpose, warrior, grit, authenticity. And part of I mentioned her partly because she talked about courage in a way that was complete nonsense. So real courage, real courage.
I remember her now.
Yeah.
She got made into a martyr because she got threatened after the Michigan election.
Yeah.
Well, lots to think about, Bill. Very good conversation, as always. I think we need to get rid of old white men like you and I, but what do I know?
I am going to keep a death grip on my position, which is no position whatsoever.
So as I half joked, Bill, maybe you should have called the piece post-erection. If you can't get an erection, then you certainly shouldn't be in public office, and that would have meant that Joe Biden would have had to have retired immediately.
I'm looking forward to seeing the test you devised to determine whether people meet your criterion.
Yeah, maybe it'll be a public one. Bread and circuses, bread and elections. We shall see, Bill. I'm not even going to do your last name because I got it right once. I'm never going to say it again. Bill, congratulations on the piece. Post-election, not post-election, post-erection, and we will talk again. This story is going to run and run and run. We will talk again in the